Security will escort you out. That's how Michael Carter chose to ruin me, loud enough to echo against the glass walls, quiet enough to sting worse. $2 billion hung in the balance, 8 executives at the polished oval table, pens lined up like weapons. The air was too clean, too staged, filtered light on crystal glasses, fake smiles sharp enough to cut. And there I was, Jessica Miller, standing in heels that suddenly felt 2 sizes too small, while my so-called boss dismantled my career in front of the most powerful people I'd ever met. Not one of them looked surprised. That was the worst part. A few smirked. Most kept their eyes down, like school kids watching a classmate get expelled. The only sound, my chair scraping back as I stood, because apparently I wasn't even allowed to sit in the room where I had negotiated half of this deal. Michael didn't even look at me when he spoke. He kept his eyes on Linda Johnson, the CEO, as if I were a coffee stain on the table. "We don't need Jessica anymore," he said, like cutting a line item from a budget. "This process requires streamlined leadership." I'll take it from here. Streamlined leadership. That was his code for erase the person who did the heavy lifting and collect the glory yourself. I had built this negotiation from the ground up: supplier lists, due diligence, compliance checks. I had memorized every clause, every decimal in that $2.04 billion puzzle. And now? Now I was being escorted out like I'd stolen someone's lunch. The guard stepped closer, his hand politely hovering near my elbow. Everyone's eyes flicked up just to see how I'd react. Would Jessica Miller crumble? Would I cry, plead, rage? That was the entertainment they were hoping for. I gave them nothing. I picked up my notebook, the cheap spiral one they all mocked me for, because I liked scribbling instead of typing. The one nobody ever noticed was always open in front of me while they bragged about strategy. Michael smoothed his tie, satisfied, and moved on with his pitch to the board. I walked toward the glass door, the guard trailing me. My reflection followed, smaller, blurred, already fading. But here's the thing, Michael Carter had just made a mistake. $1 billion mistake. And while he thought he'd stripped me of power, he'd handed me exactly the opening I needed. I didn't say a word. Not then. Not in that room. But as the door clicked shut behind me, I was already counting down the seconds to his downfall. The door shut behind me with a soft click. For most people, that sound would mean exile. For me, it meant opportunity. The guard expected me to head straight to the elevators, like a disgraced intern sent home early. But I slowed my steps, letting him hover a few paces back, too polite to actually grab me. That gave me room to move. I turned down the service corridor, the one executives never bothered to notice. The carpet was thinner here, the lights buzzing faintly, the walls scuffed by delivery carts. To them, this hallway was invisible. To me, it was a map of shortcuts and leverage. My badge was still hot. IT hadn't killed my access yet, which meant I had a window of maybe 15 minutes before the system flagged my termination and shut me out. 15 minutes to make the difference between humiliation and payback. I tapped my badge at the first side door. Green light. Click. Inside was the document prep room, humming with printers and file cabinets. I didn't take anything too obvious. But I logged into the console, ran a standard vendor integrity check, and set it to pending. That single flag would freeze all unsigned memorandums for 24 hours. Michael had no idea he'd just walked into a trap. The guard shifted awkwardly in the hall. "This way, miss." "Just grabbing my notes," I said, holding up the spiral notebook like it was the crown jewels. He didn't argue. They never argue with a woman they think just lost everything. I moved fast. Down another corridor, through a maintenance door, into the archive wing. My shoes clicked against bare concrete now. Here, the air smelled of dust and copier toner. The kind of place Michael Carter never even knew existed. I pulled my phone and snapped a photo of the access log pinned on the wall. Timestamps, signatures, late-night entries. Evidence. I didn't even need the details yet, just the trail. The guard cleared his throat. Impatient. Good. That meant my window was closing. Perfect. When I finally walked to the elevators, I looked calm, even casual, notebook under my arm. He thought he'd done his job. But what he'd really done was escort me straight through the first steps of my plan. As the elevator doors closed, I checked the timestamp on my phone. 9:42 a.m. The countdown had started. The elevator ride down felt like a coffin drop, 30 seconds of silence, the guard beside me shifting his weight like he couldn't wait to get rid of me. I didn't say a word. I let him hand me over to the lobby reception, where the woman behind the desk forced a polite smile and slid a manila envelope toward me. Final paperwork. I didn't bother opening it. The ink inside wasn't final, not yet. By the time I hit the street, the city was buzzing with lunch deliveries and impatient horns. To them, I was just another young professional carrying a notebook, looking like I'd lost my job. They had no idea I'd just frozen a $2 billion deal for 24 hours. That was the only leverage I needed, time. My apartment was the opposite of those polished conference rooms. A cracked window that never sealed right. A second-hand kitchen table covered in ring stains. But right now, that table became my war room. I dumped the spiral notebook on it, pulled out my laptop, and started unpacking every piece of the deal that Michael Carter thought he owned. First, the contracts. The master agreement was 147 pages of legal concrete. Most execs skimmed. I never skimmed. I printed my own copy weeks ago, annotated to death. My handwriting filled the margins, arrows, stars, exclamation marks. And there it was, Section 14. 3. Change of control and key personnel. A clause so dry, so boring, none of those 8 executives even remembered it existed. But it was my bullet. The clause stated, if the company removed the designated coordinator, me, without documented transition, the entire supplier pact entered administrative suspension. That meant every signature, every obligation, every billion-dollar promise was frozen until the board completed a compliance review. Translation: by firing me mid-signing, Michael had triggered a trapdoor under his own chair. I highlighted it again, even though I'd memorized the line. The satisfaction wasn't in knowing it, it was in picturing Michael's face when this landed in front of him. Next up, evidence. My phone buzzed with the photos I'd snapped in the archive corridor. Access logs, timestamps. One in particular stuck out. 10:17 p.m., Michael Carter's badge swiped into a restricted conference suite. Way after hours. And not for prep, because I'd been there until 7:30, locking up. If he was back 3 hours later, he wasn't cleaning up coffee cups. He was meeting someone. And then there was the brass key with the red tag, B12. Emily Davis, the property manager, had once joked that half the execs didn't know how many storage closets the building had. I did. And B12 wasn't just a closet, it was an archive cage for pre-final contracts. The kind that showed tracked changes, red lines, and edits that never should have made it back in. If Michael had been in there, it meant he was playing with fire. I wrote 3 names on a yellow sticky note and slapped it to the wall. Daniel Adams, compliance. My quiet ally. He noticed details, the kind nobody else cared about until they blew up. Emily Davis, building manager. Keeper of the keys, literally. Rachel Moore, outside counsel. Sharp, dangerous when cornered. They weren't friends, not really. But they were useful. And right now I needed useful more than loyal. The clock on my microwave read 11:54. Less than 3 hours since my humiliation. Already I had a plan forming, like scaffolding around a collapsing building. Step 1 was in motion, freeze. The data room's quarantine protocols meant the signatures Michael was flaunting weren't worth the paper they were printed on. Step 2, evidence. I had logs, I had a timestamp, and I knew exactly which closet I'd need Emily's help to open. Step 3, board exposure. Linda Johnson, the CEO, hated scandal more than anything. She'd protect Michael until the second his mess threatened headlines. My job wasn't to scream about betrayal, it was to quietly set the fire alarms off until the board had no choice but to pull me back in. I leaned back in my chair, eyes burning from too much screen light, but my hands steady. Michael thought he'd erased me. He hadn't realized I'd been taking notes not just on the deal, but on him. This wasn't about revenge for bruised pride. This was about $2.04 billion. And the person who understood it best wasn't in that boardroom anymore. It was me, sitting at a scratched kitchen table, already plotting the end of Michael Carter's career. The next morning, I didn't go near the office. Showing up there would have been pathetic, like begging to get back in. No, I went where power really lived, the property management office in the basement of the building, 3 floors below the executive suites. Most execs had no idea it existed. To them, the building simply worked lights on, doors open, coffee hot. But I knew better. Every corridor, every keycard, every maintenance log ran through this office. And Emily Davis sat at the center of it like a quiet queen. Emily was in her early 40s, always in plain slacks and sneakers, hair tied back like she'd given up on impressing anyone years ago. She didn't need to impress. She had the master keys. When I pushed the door open, she barely looked up from her monitor. "Thought you'd come by sooner," she said. I froze. "You heard already? Security gossip travels faster than Wi-Fi." She tapped her keyboard. "Carter kicked you out in front of the board. I've got the logs to prove it." That was Emily. No sympathy, no judgment. Just facts. That's why I liked her. I set my spiral notebook on her desk and flipped it open to the page with my scrawled note, B12. Her eyes flicked down, then back up. "You're not supposed to know about that closet." "Yeah," I said, leaning in. And Michael Carter sure as hell wasn't supposed to swipe in there at 10:17 p.m. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she slid open a drawer and pulled out a ring of keys big enough to anchor a ship. Brass tags dangled like ornaments, each one stamped with a code. She found the one marked B12 red tag, just like I remembered. "You didn't get this from me." She set it on the desk between us. I picked it up, the metal cool in my hand. The kind of weight you only felt when you knew it could tip the scales of a billion-dollar deal. "Anything else?" I asked. Emily turned her monitor toward me. A screen full of logs. Entries, exits, timestamps. My own badge swipes were there, ending at 7:32 p.m. the night before. Then, silence. Until Carter's name lit up at 10:17 p.m., entering B12. He stayed for 23 minutes. Left at 10:40. No one else. Who'd he meet? I asked. That's the thing, Emily said. He didn't swipe anyone else in. If someone was with him, they were already inside. My stomach tightened. That meant Carter had either smuggled someone in earlier or they'd had access on their own. Neither option was good news. I copied the log into my notebook, timestamps, badge IDs, even the subtle detail that Carter's exit came 3 minutes after the janitorial crew clocked out. Too precise to be coincidence. Emily leaned back in her chair. "So what's your play, Jess? You're not getting your job back." I slipped the key into my pocket. "This isn't about the job. It's about the deal." And Carter just handed me the rope to hang him with. For the first time, Emily cracked a smile. "Careful. Guys like him don't go down easy." "Good," I said, standing. "I don't like easy." By the time I left the basement, I had what I needed. Proof Carter had been in the archives after hours and the key to see exactly what he'd been doing there. Above me, 8 executives were probably still congratulating him for streamlining leadership. They had no idea their golden boy had already violated Section 14. 3 of the master agreement. And soon, when I opened that closet, I'd know just how deep his mess went. The war wasn't in the boardroom anymore. It was in the shadows under their feet. I didn't go home after leaving Emily's office. Not yet. I needed one more piece before the picture came together, and for that, I had to see Daniel Adams. Daniel worked in compliance, buried 2 floors above legal, in a corner cubicle that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and dust. Most people ignored him, which made him perfect. People who get ignored notice everything. When I walked into the compliance floor, heads turned, then quickly ducked back down. They'd heard, of course. Word spread like fire in a dry field. Jessica Miller, publicly fired in front of the board. I didn't give them the satisfaction of looking embarrassed. I strode straight through to Daniel's desk. He looked up over his glasses, calm as always. "Should I be saying sorry right now or congratulations?" "Neither," I said, dropping into the chair across from him. "I need you to run something for me." Quietly. Daniel arched an eyebrow. "You realize Carter just made you radioactive." "Then call me Fallout," I shot back. "Do this, and you'll see why." That got a ghost of a smile out of him. He pushed aside a stack of vendor certifications and folded his hands. "What am I looking for?" I pulled the notebook from my bag and flipped it open. "Supplier attestations. The ones attached to the $2.04 billion deal. I want you to compare the signatures against prior year filings. Date stamps, initials, even line thickness if you have to. Something doesn't smell right." Daniel leaned forward. "You think they're forged?" "I think Carter's been swapping pages. I want to know which ones." He didn't argue. He just swiveled his monitor and started typing. That was Daniel, no speeches, no bravado, just action. His fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up PDFs, cross-referencing, overlaying signatures. While he worked, I scanned the compliance wall behind him. Policies pinned with pushpins, binders stacked like bricks, half of them never touched unless something went wrong. And now, something was very wrong. Here, Daniel said after 10 minutes, pointing to his screen. See this? Two signatures side by side. At first glance, identical. But zoomed in, the differences screamed. The loop of the R sharper. The tail of the N cut short. Not natural drift, digital cloning. Page substitution, Daniel said. Whoever did this cut the attestation from one doc and dropped it into another. Sloppy too. Metadata says the file was altered at 11:04 p.m. 2 nights ago. My pulse kicked. And Carter was in the archives at 10:17 that night. Daniel turned his chair toward me, lowering his voice. Jess, this isn't just a bad look. This is fraud. If the board gets wind of this. They will, I said, my tone steady. But not yet. First, I need the whole chain. Which suppliers, how many pages, what clauses got slipped in. Daniel rubbed his temples. Do you have any idea what kind of bomb you're asking me to build? Yes, I said. The kind that saves the company $2 billion before Carter blows it for all of us. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. Give me a day. You have 12 hours, I corrected. After that, signatures start moving again. And if that happens, we're both done. He gave a quiet laugh, the kind of laugh you only hear from someone who's about to do something reckless, but can't resist. You really don't do small, do you? Not when there are billions on the line. I left compliance with a thumb drive tucked in my pocket, Daniel's starter packet of inconsistencies. Enough to prove Carter had dirted the record. Enough to keep me in the game. On my way out, I glanced through the glass wall at the executive suite. I could see Michael inside, standing too close to Linda Johnson, gesturing with those smooth hands of his. Selling himself as the hero. I almost smiled. Let him have his spotlight. Because when Daniel finished, when the logs and signatures aligned, the light would swing, and Michael Carter wouldn't be a hero anymore. He'd be the headline. By evening, my apartment looked like a conspiracy den. Contracts spread across the table, sticky notes plastered on the wall, my spiral notebook lying open with frantic scribbles. Every clause, every timestamp, every inconsistency was mapped like pieces of a crime scene. But there was one hole I couldn't patch yet. One shadow I couldn't name. Carter hadn't been alone at 10:17 p.m. The log said no second badge swipe, but I knew him. Michael Carter never did dirty work without a witness, or a partner. I started digging. The data room was my weapon. Not because I hacked it, I didn't need to. I had designed half its workflows myself, and that meant I knew where the shortcuts lived. Carter thought locking me out would keep me blind. What he didn't realize was that his own arrogance left fingerprints everywhere. I opened the shared calendar metadata. Most people never looked at it beyond their meeting times. But if you knew what to ask for, it told you everything: when an invite was created, who forwarded it, whether it was edited, even if it was deleted after the fact. And there it was. 10:17 p.m. An invite Michael had sent out. Recipient hidden behind a generic vendor alias, Westbridge Partners. The subject line, Priority Lanes Discussion. No description. No attachments. Just a single line, meet me. I sat back in my chair. Westbridge wasn't part of our negotiations. They weren't even cleared through procurement. Which meant Michael was promising something off-book. A side deal. And here was the beauty of it. The invite was still in the metadata. He deleted it from his visible calendar, sure. But the system kept an immutable trace, a kind of ghost that never went away. I snapped a screenshot, then two, then three. Labeled them. Saved them to a hidden folder. The doorbell rang. I jumped. Through the peephole, Rachel Moore. I opened the door. She walked in like she owned the place, heels clicking against my cheap linoleum. You look like hell, she said, dropping her bag on the table and eyeing the papers. Nice to see you too, I muttered. Rachel pulled out her laptop without waiting for an invitation. Emily told me Carter was in B12. Daniel told me you've got doctored signatures. What else am I missing? I hesitated. Rachel wasn't a friend. She was a lawyer. Lawyers never did charity work. Why are you here? Because if this deal collapses, my firm loses 3 clients. And because I don't like watching Carter strut around like he owns the city. She typed fast, already pulling up statutes. So, do we play this quiet, or do we file? I slid the screenshots across the table. Neither. Not yet. Look. Rachel leaned in. Her eyes narrowed as she read the metadata. He invited Westbridge. At night. Off record. Jesus. Exactly, I said. If the board sees this right now, it looks like a technicality. They'll bury it. But if we hold it until after Daniel finishes tracing the forged signatures, then we've got a full-blown integrity scandal, she finished. Unavoidable. They can't ignore it without putting themselves on the line. We stared at each other across the kitchen table. For the first time, Rachel actually looked impressed. You know this could bury him, right? She said. That's the plan. Rachel sat back. Then we'll need to preserve it. Legal duty. I'll draft a notice tonight. Once it's served, no one can delete these records without committing obstruction. Even Carter. I nodded. My pulse was steady now cold. Do it. By the time Rachel left, it was past midnight. The city outside had gone quiet, but my apartment hummed with the weight of what we'd found. I pinned a new sticky note to the wall. Westbridge. 10:17 p.m. Carter thought firing me would erase me from the game. Instead, it had forced me underground, into the shadows he never thought I'd navigate. And now I had him meeting a rival vendor at the exact time he was doctoring signatures. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was conspiracy. By morning, the corporate building was a hive of motion. Black cars lined the curb, executives in polished suits rushing inside with phones glued to their ears. Everyone looked busy, important, irreplaceable. Everyone except me. I sat 2 blocks away in a cafe that smelled like burnt espresso and cleaning solution, laptop open, spiral notebook beside me. From here, I had the perfect vantage point, close enough to watch them scurry, far enough to stay invisible. The countdown was running. The vendor integrity check I triggered yesterday had frozen the $2.04 billion packed for exactly 24 hours. After that, unless I made another move, the quarantine would lift and Michael Carter would be free to push his signatures through. I wasn't going to let that happen. The data room was cloud-based, encrypted, bulletproof, or so Carter liked to brag. But I knew better. I'd been part of the team that set it up. I knew every safeguard, every kill switch, every bureaucratic tripwire baked into its guts. I logged in with my still valid credentials. HR hadn't processed my termination yet. Their delay was my gold mine. The dashboard glowed on my screen. Contracts, supplier attestations, board memos, all stacked neatly like a house of cards. Carter thought he owned this castle. He didn't know I still held the fuse. I navigated to the role change protocol, an obscure rule hidden under administrative settings. It wasn't sabotage, it was compliance. The system was designed to protect billion-dollar deals from sudden leadership swaps. If a coordinator was removed mid-process, the system automatically shifted all documents into pending verification until new oversight was formally approved. In other words, by firing me, Carter had unknowingly pulled the trigger himself. I just had to tighten the lock. I clicked Initiate Quarantine. Instantly, the screen changed. All 8, now that the board had been pared down, executives' signatures evaporated from valid to pending. Dozens of supplier reps who thought their deals were about to close got a red banner across their dashboards, awaiting compliance review. Chaos, neatly gift-wrapped. My phone buzzed within 10 minutes. First Emily. Then Daniel. Then, finally, Rachel. Rachel didn't bother with pleasantries. What did you just do? My inbox is melting down. Triggered section 14.3, I said, sipping my coffee. Everything's quarantined until the board formally approves new oversight. You realize Carter's going to come after you for this, right? He already fired me. What's he going to do? Fire me harder? Rachel exhaled sharply. Jessica, you just turned a $2 billion deal into a hostage situation. The board will be in emergency session within hours. Good, I said. That's exactly where I want them. Across the street, through the cafe window, I saw Carter storm into the building, phone pressed to his ear, jaw clenched so tight I could see it from here. 2 assistants scrambled to keep up. He looked furious and nervous. The second part was new. I jotted another note in my spiral, leverage achieved. Because here's the truth. In the corporate world, nobody cares about fairness or loyalty. They care about stability. And right now, Carter looked like instability in an expensive suit. The more he fought to unfreeze the deal, the guiltier he'd look. The more signatures bounced, the more questions the board would ask. And when Daniel's forged page analysis dropped, when Rachel's preservation notice landed, Carter's carefully polished image would collapse under its own weight. I closed my laptop and stood. Time to get closer. By the time I reached the building lobby, the place was electric. Assistants rushing between elevators, executives whispering in clusters, security pacing like they'd lost the plot. Everyone felt it, the tension of billions hanging in limbo. I didn't walk toward the elevators. I walked toward the side corridor. Emily was waiting there, badge dangling around her neck, expression tight. "You weren't kidding," she said. "The whole building's on fire. Carter's screaming upstairs. Board's calling an emergency at 2. "Perfect," I said, keeping my voice steady. Emily studied me, then lowered her voice. "Jess, you know once this hits the boardroom, there's no turning back. You either bury him, or he buries you." I smiled faintly. "That's the plan." I touched the brass B12 key in my pocket. That closet still held answers. But first, I wanted Carter sweating under the board spotlight. And after today, he'd never stop sweating again. The emergency board session was scheduled for 2 o'clock. By noon, my phone was already lighting up like a slot machine. Unknown numbers. Assistant lines. Even a blocked call that I'd bet money was Carter himself. I didn't answer any of them. Let them stew. Then came the one I expected, Linda Johnson, CEO. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Jessica Miller," I said flatly, like I hadn't just detonated a billion-dollar panic grenade. "Jessica." Linda's voice was smooth, rehearsed, the kind of tone CEOs use when they're one headline away from collapse. "I trust you're aware of the disruption this morning." "I am," I said, scribbling the time in my spiral notebook. Section 14(3) is very clear. Removal of a designated coordinator triggers administrative suspension. I didn't write it. I just followed it. "Jessica." Her voice dropped lower, a hint of warning under the polish. "Do you realize what this looks like?" "Yes," I said. "It looks like compliance doing its job." Silence. Just for a beat. Then Linda exhaled through her nose. "What exactly are you trying to achieve?" That was the moment. I could have begged for my position back, asked for vindication, tried to scrape dignity out of humiliation. But no, that wasn't the move. "I'm trying to save you $2.04 billion, I said. "And I'll prove it at 2 o'clock. Before she could answer, I hung up. At 1:45, I was in the lobby, blending with the swirl of staff and vendors, spiral notebook clutched to my chest like an ordinary employee. No one stopped me. They were too distracted, buzzing about the frozen contracts, whispering that the biggest supplier pact in company history was crumbling. Upstairs, in the glass-walled boardroom, 8 executives sat around the oval table again. But this time, Carter didn't look smug. He looked pale, jaw tight, tie a little too loose. He was trying to spin, I could see it through the glass, hands gesturing, voice raised. At 2:02, the door opened. An assistant stepped out, scanned the lobby, then found me. "Ms. Miller. They'll see you now." I walked in. The room smelled of nerves and money. Papers rustled. Glasses clinked. No one smiled. "Jessica," Linda said, her expression controlled. "Please explain what you've done." I set my spiral notebook on the table, flipped it open, and slid a single page forward. Not a rant. Not an accusation. Just one thing. Section 14(3), highlighted in yellow. "This clause," I said, keeping my tone even, mandates suspension of all agreements if the designated coordinator is removed without documented transition. Yesterday morning, I was removed. There was no documented transition. I looked directly at Carter. Therefore, the system correctly froze every contract. Carter's jaw flexed. "This is theatrics. You've manipulated." "No," I cut in. "I followed the system you signed off on. If you want to override it, you'll need to explain to auditors why you broke your own compliance rules." Silence settled like dust. A couple of board members shifted uncomfortably. One scribbled a note. Linda steepled her fingers. "And why should we believe this isn't a personal vendetta?" I slid a second sheet across the table, the access log. 10:17 p.m. Carter. B12. 23 minutes. No companion swipe. "This isn't personal," I said. "It's procedural. Someone re-entered the archives after hours. Someone altered supplier attestations. The metadata doesn't lie. All I've done is make sure the deal pauses long enough for you to see it before signatures turn into liabilities. I didn't mention Westbridge yet. Not yet. That was my ace." One of the board members, a gray-haired man with half-moon glasses, cleared his throat. "If what she's saying holds, we could be exposed to litigation if we push forward." Exactly the phrase I wanted to hear. Exposed to litigation. The kryptonite of every boardroom. Carter tried to jump in, voice sharp. "She's twisting technicalities to make herself relevant." But he was already losing them. I could see it in their eyes. Doubt had landed, and doubt is contagious. Linda finally nodded. "We will review these claims. The contracts remain frozen until further notice. Her gaze cut to me. Cold. Calculated. Jessica, do not mistake this for reinstatement. But you will be consulted in this review. Translation: I wasn't back in, but I wasn't out either. And Carter? He'd just been forced to share the stage with the woman he'd humiliated less than 24 hours ago. I picked up my notebook, snapped it shut, and gave him the faintest smile. Let him sweat. The real evidence was still locked in B12. The boardroom air was still clinging to me when I stepped into the service stairwell. My pulse hadn't slowed. Not because I was scared. Because I knew exactly where to go next. The brass key weighed heavy in my pocket. B12. Most executives thought archives were digital only now. They forgot paper still mattered. Drafts. Early versions. The messy, red-lined pages legal never wanted leaked. If Carter had been in B12 at 10:17 p.m., then those drafts mattered. And tonight, they were mine. Emily met me on the sublevel. The hallway down there was bare concrete, pipes overhead, humming with old machinery. No polish, no glass, no staged perfection. Just the guts of the building. You sure about this? She asked, arms crossed. Positive, I said. She handed me a flashlight. They don't maintain the lights down here. You'll need it. The lock was old brass, the kind that turned with a satisfying clunk instead of a beep. The door creaked open, releasing a breath of stale paper and dust. I stepped inside. The archive smelled like forgotten decades. Boxes stacked to the ceiling. Labels faded. Old contracts, binders, file folders with peeling tape. I clicked on the flashlight and swept the beam across shelves. Somewhere in this chaos, Carter had been hunting. I started with the table in the middle. Someone had left it clear recently. Not janitors, they never came this deep. No, this was a workspace. A staging area. And on that table sat a stack of printouts. I pulled the top one free. My breath caught. It was the supplier agreement, our agreement, but in tracked changes. Clauses I remembered cutting weeks ago were back in, highlighted green as accepted. Entire paragraphs tilted in favor of vendor pricing, shaving millions from our side. Buried in the margins was the kicker, a kickback clause disguised as performance incentives. The kind of poison pill that would cost us tens of millions under the radar. And at the bottom of the page? A signature block. Not digital. What ink? Carter's initials. I shoved the papers back and dug deeper. Page after page told the same story. Alterations sneaked in, compliance bypassed, savings erased. Carter hadn't just made a side deal. He'd been actively rewriting the terms to favor Westbridge, or whoever was behind them. And the timestamp on the printer log stapled to the corner? 10:32 p.m. Right in the middle of his unauthorized visit. Got you. Behind me, Emily whispered, Jess, this is bad. Bad for him, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I snapped photos of every page. Then I slid 3 originals into my notebook, tucked carefully under blank paper. Evidence in hand. Enough to burn him to ash if the board saw it. Emily shook her head. You realize if Carter finds out you've got this, he won't just fight back. He'll nuke the whole building to protect himself. Then I'll make sure the board sees it before he even knows I touched it. She didn't argue. Just looked at me like someone watching a fuse burn too close to the dynamite. When I finally left the archives, the key back in my pocket, I knew 2 things for certain. 1. Carter hadn't just played dirty. He'd broken the deal wide open, and I had the proof in black ink. 2. Once I showed this, there'd be no coming back. Not for him. Maybe not for me either. But I wasn't here to come back. I was here to win. And tomorrow, in that glass-walled boardroom, Carter was going to choke on his own signatures. The next morning, the building was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. Assistants with armfuls of binders sprinted between elevators. Security clustered near the boardroom door, earpieces flashing. The whispers weren't even subtle anymore. The deal's collapsing, Carter's cornered, the board smells blood. Perfect. Rachel met me outside the lobby Starbucks, phone pressed to her ear, heels clicking sharp against the marble. She ended her call with a snap, eyes blazing. We've got 20 minutes. You ready? I patted my spiral notebook. Born ready. She smirked. Don't get cocky. They'll try to eat you alive in there. Then let's make them choke. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was heavy enough to cut. 8 executives sat around the oval table, each one with a glass of water they weren't touching. Linda Johnson at the head, expression carved from stone. Carter 2 seats down, posture stiff, tie perfectly centered, but the sheen of sweat at his temple betraying him. They let me sit this time. Not at the table, of course. A side chair like an unwanted witness in a courtroom. Fine. I didn't need the table. I had the evidence. Linda started. Mr. Carter, you've assured us the disruption yesterday was nothing more than procedural friction. Before we continue, Ms. Miller has requested to present supplementary information. Jessica. All eyes shifted to me. Some curious. Some skeptical. One Carter's, burning with fury. I stood, notebook in hand. I'll keep this simple. Last night, I retrieved documents from the B12 archive room. Documents Mr. Carter accessed at 10:17 p.m. I placed the first page on the table. A supplier agreement, clauses highlighted in green. These terms were cut 3 weeks ago by our legal team. Yet somehow, they reappeared accepted. Along with a performance incentive clause that funnels tens of millions to a third-party intermediary. These aren't typos. They're deliberate insertions. I slid the second page forward, the printer log, timestamped 10:32 p.m. And this was printed during Mr. Carter's unauthorized visit. The silence was electric. Pen stopped moving. One board member adjusted his glasses, staring hard at the page. Carter jumped in. This is absurd. Anyone could have planted those. She was terminated. She has no standing. Rachel cut him off, her voice sharp. Termination doesn't erase evidence. And metadata doesn't lie. She clicked her laptop, projecting the calendar screenshot onto the wall. 10:17 p.m. invite. Recipient, Westbridge Partners. Subject, priority lanes. This wasn't a coincidence, Rachel continued. Mr. Carter met with an unvetted vendor while simultaneously altering supplier contracts. That's not leadership. That's exposure. Murmurs rippled through the room. One board member leaned toward another, whispering fiercely. Linda raised a hand. Mr. Carter, how do you respond? He straightened, trying for calm. Westbridge was exploratory. Due diligence. Nothing more. And as for the documents, if anything was reintroduced, it was in service of negotiating better terms. I stepped forward, holding up the page with his initials. Then explain why your handwriting is on the corner. Initials dated the same night. If that's better terms, why hide it in an archive closet? The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The gray-haired board member with half-moon glasses cleared his throat. This isn't just messy. This exposes us to liability on a scale we can't absorb. Fraud. Breach of compliance. Regulatory action. We can't sign anything until this is resolved. That was it. The words Carter feared most, fraud and regulatory action. Linda closed her binder with a snap. Effective immediately, Mr. Carter, your authority over this pact is suspended pending review. Then she turned to me. Jessica, you'll remain involved as a subject matter witness. Your notes will be entered into record. Carter slammed his pen down, the sound echoing through the glass room. He didn't look at me, but I saw his hand trembling. I sat back down, notebook on my lap, hiding the smile tugging at my lips. The trap had sprung, and Michael Carter had walked straight into it. When the board adjourned for a recess, the tension in that glass-walled room leaked into the hallways like gas. Assistants whispered in corners, security hovered by the doors, and Carter paced the lobby like a caged animal, phone glued to his ear. I didn't need to hear him to know he was begging someone to bail him out. I stayed put. Calm. Spiral notebook balanced on my knee. Because I knew what was coming. At 3 o'clock sharp, the board reconvened. Linda Johnson spoke first, her tone measured but heavy. The evidence presented today requires immediate corrective action. We cannot allow this company to be exposed to contractual risk of this magnitude. Carter sat forward, his voice clipped. With respect, Linda, freezing me out mid-negotiation only compounds instability. I've already contained the fallout. Removing me now undermines continuity. Linda's eyes narrowed. Continuity only matters if it's built on integrity. Right now, we don't have that assurance. She turned to the table. We need a neutral coordinator to salvage these negotiations. Someone who knows the contracts, the suppliers, and the compliance framework. The silence was long enough for me to hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then the gray-haired board member with the glasses cleared his throat. Jessica Miller fits that description. Carter's head whipped toward him. She was terminated. She's biased, disruptive. Another board member cut him off. She's the only one who flagged Section 14, 3 before this became catastrophic. Without her, we'd already be locked into fraudulent terms. Linda finally looked at me. Cold, assessing. Jessica, would you accept a temporary reinstatement as deal coordinator, reporting directly to this board? Every eye in the room was on me. Even Carter's, blazing with disbelief. I didn't let my voice shake. Yes, but only under one condition: full authority to restructure any clause that exposes us to liability. Murmurs again. Carter tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. She's power-tripping already. Linda ignored him. Granted. And, just like that, the flip was complete. Yesterday, Carter had me escorted out like dead weight. Today, I was back, legally empowered, board-sanctioned, holding the pen over a $2 billion contract. The first thing I did was reopen the deal room on the projection screen. Rows of contracts blinked, pending verification. Supplier reps were on standby, furious at the delay. Carter had told them this was a formality. I was about to show them it wasn't. I highlighted the fraudulent clauses one by one. These incentive structures are designed to siphon profits. Removing them restores $180 million in penalties and rebates to our side over the 5-year term. Gasps. Notes scribbled. One board member leaned forward, muttering, "How the hell did this get past US?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The implication was clear: Carter. Then I clicked the calendar metadata, the 10:17 p.m. Westbridge invite. And here we see an unapproved vendor being courted off the books. If Westbridge had slipped in through this back door, our entire procurement framework would have been compromised. Rachel, seated in the back, chimed in. Legally indefensible. That alone could tank shareholder confidence. The board nodded grimly. I could feel the shift, like a tide pulling out to sea. Carter was losing ground fast, and he knew it. He slammed his hand on the table. You're letting her grandstand. This is sabotage. I turned toward him, calm as ice. Sabotage is rewriting contracts in a locked archive at 10:32 p.m. Silence. He had no comeback. By 5 o'clock, the board voted unanimously: Carter suspended pending investigation, me installed as interim coordinator. I walked out of that glass room to the sight of staff whispering, security repositioning, executives ducking their heads. The same people who'd watched me humiliated yesterday now avoided eye contact like I carried fire. Carter stayed inside, red-faced, phone still in hand. But the calls weren't going to save him now. The power had flipped. In less than 48 hours, I'd gone from discarded to indispensable. And this time, I wasn't just in the room. I owned the room. The win didn't last 24 hours before Michael Carter tried to claw his way back. At 8 the next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. News alerts. Headlines exploding across finance sites. Historic supplier deal in chaos after internal power struggle. Anonymous sources painting me as the saboteur. Carter's fingerprints were all over it. The board hated nothing more than messy headlines. If this narrative stuck, I'd be out again, this time for good. I threw on a blazer, grabbed my spiral notebook, and headed straight to the building. The lobby was chaos. Reporters pressed against the glass doors, shouting questions. Jessica, did you tank the deal? Are you being investigated for misconduct? Security kept them out, but their cameras were rolling. Exactly the image Carter wanted. Rachel was waiting by the elevators, phone in hand. He leaked it. Fed them a half-truth and made you the villain. Then we feed them the whole truth, I said. On the 20th floor, the board was already assembled. Carter was there too, smug again, riding the wave of his leak. Linda opened sharply. Jessica, these headlines are damaging. Investors are calling. Explain yourself. I didn't waste time. I dropped 3 documents on the table. The forged supplier attestations Daniel traced. The printer log from 10:32 p.m. in B12. The Westbridge calendar invite metadata. Carter's leak says I disrupted stability, I said. The truth is he destroyed stability with fraudulent documents, unauthorized vendor access, and hidden side deals. If this hits regulators, those headlines will look like child's play. I turned to David Wilson, the client CTO, who had dialed in by video. David, would your company sign under Carter's terms? David shook his head. No chance. We'd walk. Under Jessica's corrections? We stay. Silence fell like a hammer. That was it. A client publicly choosing me over Carter. The board murmured, trading glances. Linda finally said, this leak was reckless. Mr. Carter, your actions now rise to misconduct. Effective immediately, you are terminated. Carter shot to his feet, face red. You'll regret this. But no one was listening. Security stepped forward. For once, it was his turn to be escorted out. By 5 p.m., the revised contracts were signed under my coordination. Clean, verified, airtight. $2.04 billion locked, with $180 million in penalties and rebates restored. The headlines flipped within hours. Board cleans house, secures record-breaking supplier deal. Carter's leak had backfired. And I hadn't just survived it. I'd buried him with it. The next day, Carter's office was empty. His name stripped from the directory. His parking spot reassigned. Just like that, the man who had strutted through boardrooms was erased. The deal, on the other hand, was alive. Stronger than before. My signature was on every final page. The same board that watched me humiliated now clapped my shoulder in the hallway, pretending they'd believed in me all along. I didn't thank them. I didn't need their approval. I had the win, and Carter had nothing. Weeks later, I sat in a smaller office, my office. A lean team reporting directly to me. No gloss, no arrogance. Just results. I thought about Carter's words, "We don't need Jessica anymore." He was right in one way. They didn't need me. They needed someone who could see what they ignored. The lesson? Being underestimated isn't a weakness. It's cover. They never see you coming until it's too late. So let me ask you, how many times have you been written off, pushed aside, treated like dead weight? And what would happen if you turned that into leverage? Because in my case, I turned it into $2.04 billion. And don't forget, every story lives as long as it is remembered. A like is your mark on the story, and a subscription is your ticket to the next one.